as people continue to join, I want to remind you that next please, that this webinar is being recorded and also will be publicly available afterwards. So also the photos and notes from this activity can be used in the project outputs. So if you prefer photos of you not to be used, please turn off the camera. And you can also have a look at other project privacy policies on our website. So we also want to create a safe, respectful environment with where everyone can feel comfortably, can participate comfortably. And for that, so we ask you to use the QA function to ask questions or to contribute to the discussions. We also will have different Q&A sessions. In those sessions, you may raise your hand and open up your mics during this part of the webinar. So next, please, Ryan. So as you may know, this webinar series is part of the Share Green Deal project, which is a 5 years EU-funded project that started in 2022, and that brings together 22 partners across Europe that work on exploring how social science and humanities research can support the implementation of the European Green Deal. So we aim to demonstrate how research in areas like sociology, human geography, psychology, and others can support socially innovative practices for climate change goals. In doing so, we are covering 6 policy priority areas that are energy, circular economy, renovation, mobility, food, biodiversity. And in doing so, also we have been working together with local authorities and civil societies organizations who are at the forefront of delivering on climate change policies. In totally, we engage in 24 locations across Europe. On today, we are going to talk with representatives from 4 of those locations. Those locations constitute our case studies on the results of their experiences during the last year of social experimentation will be publicly available this year by autumn. So now I will give the floor to Chris Foulds from the Anglia Ruskin University, who will talk to you more about the experiment and the role of knowledge in efficient renovation. So Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, and great to see everyone here. I'm really excited about today's webinar. I think it's a really nice opportunity to celebrate all of the amazing work that the local partners have done over the last year or so. But before we get to that, I'm going to be holding back that discussion briefly, just so we can talk a little bit about the context and kind of what led to that work, really. So if we could move on to the next slide, please. And I will definitely move through this one fairly quickly, as I suspect that this is familiar news to those of you that have signed up to a webinar on energy efficient renovations. But just to emphasize that energy efficient renovations are critical, really, to mitigating climate change. And why is this? Well, I mean, there's almost 120 million residential buildings across Europe. 38% of them were built before 1970. 85% of them were built before 2001. I saw a figure that maybe only 12% of them have been renovated to some degree to account for energy efficiency. And in 2050, 85 to 90% of today's buildings will still be around. So obviously things need to be done. We need to improve the energy efficiency of our building stock. And there's also issues of energy poverty, which have, really grown with the cost of living crisis. So, this really matters kind of socially and in terms of, justice and treating our publics correctly and right. So, I mean, as that figure shows at the bottom of the slide there, an estimated 40 million Europeans were unable to afford heating their home in 2022. Next slide, please. So this has led to the EU renovation wave strategy. This is an interesting strategy read if you're into those sorts of things for the European Commission, which then affects all member states. And one of the many commitments in there is that they're wanting to double the annual energy efficient renovation rate by 2030. So this would mean that across the decade of 2020 to 2023, they're wanting to renovate 35 million buildings across Europe, and they're wanting to generate 160,000 jobs in renovation and construction industries. So this is a big deal. They're wanting to invest a lot here. They know that things need to happen, and this is part of, I think, why we've got some of the funding that we have, so that we're able to try out some slightly different approaches at kind of really quite a local level, just to see what can be done as part of all contributing towards this big challenge. Next slide, please. So, what is renovation know-how and why are we interested in it? This is a central thread of our work. We see it as the practical knowledge that helps someone get an energy efficient renovation done. It's, as it sounds, knowing how to do renovation. And we argue that it's often learned through experience, through interactions with others, rather than doing it by yourself, although it can be. Often it's a bit more implicit and unspoken. Sometimes you just figure it out and know how to do something, but you maybe don't verbalize it and tell people and talk about it in that way. And so it can even be kind of sensory, to do with feeling, touching, and just kind of experiencing the technology or whatever it may be. So an example that I would give would be, if you've just bought a new telephone, a new mobile phone, you may not read the instruction manual. You may just open it up and start moving through the menus and kind of understand how to use that phone based upon your experience in that moment. And that will sort of be interpreted on the basis of how you've experienced and used previous telephones. Now, we want to use that kind of thinking and apply it to how to get renovations done. So if we could go on to the next slide, and I'll give a few more examples. So maybe you'll be guessing some of these. We'll start in the top left and move horizontally. So the top left is to do with knowing how to manage supply chains and contractors. Can feel perhaps a bit like a project management task doing renovations, particularly if you're doing it by yourself. There's plumbers, there's engineers, there's planners, there's design teams, there's painters. There's all sorts of people that you may need to involve. And even liaising with someone that's doing it for you is a skill. The next one, the one in the middle and the top, is knowing how specific renovation approaches and technologies relate to your unique home. In the top right, there's a social element to this. Maybe you need to talk to your neighbor. The renovation could cause them some disruption, or maybe there's a planning application, or maybe you want to do a joint energy efficient renovation with them that kind of tackles both your properties together. In the bottom left, there's something about kind of fiddling and experiencing the technologies before you potentially pay thousands of pounds for it. Maybe if you've got a friend or a family that's already got this new ventilation system or this new heating system, you'd understandably want to have a fiddle, have a play with the controls to see if that's something that you'd like. In the middle is voting. In multi-apartment buildings, there's procedures often in Europe where you have to vote to get things done. It's not just one household deciding on this. And in the bottom right, another example would be paperwork, finance, all these things that you need to figure out the loopholes and the forms to complete to get the renovation through. So all of these are kind of skills, knowledge that will help you do a renovation. Next slide, please. And we would say this is clearly quite different from kind of intellectual, fact-based, technical knowledge, which maybe you could argue you could get from reading a book or a website, and you don't necessarily experience in the same way. I'm not saying that this sort of knowledge isn't useful and important, but it's different, and it fulfills a different purpose in trying to achieve energy efficient renovations. So if we could go on to the next slide for a few examples. So there's some examples of perhaps what we're looking a bit less into is trying to get people to understand that energy efficiency is important. They get it, or that climate change matters, or even what the different technological options are or how they work. Yes, these things are useful, but it's not quite the knowing how to get it done sort of knowledge that we feel is really important. So if we go on to my final slide, please. So what did all this mean? This led to the creation of 4 knowledge networks in these 4 different locations. And I think each of these local partners will be introduced one by one in a moment. And over the course of a year, they set up and ran a network which involved at least 30 in total professionals in the renovation space, whether it's from architects, industry, manufacturer, suppliers, or funders, or householders as well, interested in doing renovations. And they ran events which focused on learning, and that included knowing how to get renovation done. And there was a real emphasis on being interactive and learning through doing. So things like eco tours, where they could go to homes that have recently been renovated and see and touch and ask questions and kind of see what the recent experience would be and understand if it was for them. So this was sort of our direction and background. And I'll pass back to hear more about these. Thank you.
So thank you, Chris, for those first insights on the in our network, also on the 4 locations. So as you say, the local networks offer to the participant and to the members the opportunity to visit and to interact with different renovation sites, and to explore and also resolve doubts and questions about the process, the techniques, the different concerns that may arrive during a renovation process. And now you could also observe some of those activities on some of the experiences and insights from the local networks in a short video that Ryan is now is going to share with you now. Ryan, please.
Ryan, you're not sharing with sound.
And it's pumped from the back of the van through a machine through this pipe, and we just blow it out loose on top of there is the attic insulation up there, fiberglass, so we're putting another layer. There's about 200 mil thick on top of the fiberglass that's existing.
Glazing the whole house with triple glazing, but some kind person informed us that the triple with the quality of the glazing that's already in place, it's double glazing, that there probably wouldn't be a great deal to be gained by going down the triple glazing route, so we've actually decided to abandon.
Acabamos de estar aquí viendo la obra que han hecho los de Zaragoza Vivienda en estos bloques de viviendas sociales, y la verdad es que es impresionante, interesantísimo desde el punto de vista, desde luego, de eficiencia energética, tanto para calor como frío.
Y me ha parecido muy interesante la visita en cuanto al contenido en sí, y sobre todo en cuanto a ideas de cómo poder enfocar la rehabilitación de las casas, pero en definitiva la rehabilitación de los barrios. Del barrio del que hablo, pues es un barrio muy antiguo, sobre todo su parte central, que necesita unas intervenciones muy serias. ¿Qué hacemos en esos edificios donde hay una mayoría de inquilinos en situación precaria y en unas condiciones de vida verdaderamente lamentables y cuyos propietarios no están interesados en la rehabilitación? Mujeres, viudas, con una pensión mínima, viviendo en un cuarto sin ascensor, con frío, con humedades, etcétera. Creo que es un reto que deberíamos afrontar como vecinos y como Zaragoza Vivienda.
So, thank you. So as you can see, the tours on the activities of the networks involve visits to either single homes, detached homes in rural areas, but also in some cases in cities, multi-apartment buildings that could be visited only on the outsides in order not to intrude the privacy of families. On those different approaches are also going to be more explained in more detail by our local partners. So now it's time to welcome then our local partners from the climate action Louisburgh locality and island, from ECODES in Spain, Let's Renovate the City in Lithuania, and Habitat for Humanity in Hungary. So our local partners are going to be discussing and talking with my colleague Pia about their experiences on the work they've done and the challenges they faced during this year of social experimentation. So Pia, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So, hi everyone. I'm now shortly going to introduce our local partners and then engage in a discussion with them. So, if you would go to the next slide, Ryan, I can present our first local partner organization, Climate Action Louisburgh locality, short CALL, which is a non-for-profit voluntary group that operates in the rural community in West Island, within and in cooperation with the County of Mayo. You can see on the left-hand side some pictures. They are working together for a more sustainable future and are part of Mayo's decarbonization network. They are acting in several subgroups on the topics of sustainable energy, mobility, living, and local food production and biodiversity. Louisburgh being a sparsely inhabited area, CALL was able to create a knowledge network that involves 36 active members, including a lot of renovation professionals and also residents from the area. Next slide, please. So we have also brought you some quotes of the Renovation Consortium, and especially want to thank you for your incredible effort in making sure that you include all kinds of people in your network and that you motivate and mobilize them to take part in 12 eco home tours. And I'm now going to talk to Richard Mannion, one representative of CALL, about their lived experiences during the experiment and all the practical aspects that they could learn and share during their events. So if we want to go out of the slides now, then we can see who we are talking to. And I think CALL is even here with more representatives today. So maybe we also hear some other voices, but my first question would be to you, Richard. So we heard Louisburgh is situated in the rural area of West Island, and where people take quite some time to reach meeting points and join regional network meetings. So my question would be, who were the groups that engaged in your network, and why do you think that you nevertheless the distance managed to engage so many people in your activities?
Thanks, Pia. I suppose Louisburgh is a small rural community, and so we would be able to recruit many of the citizen group from our locality. But when it came to recruiting the professionals, we had to move outside of our locality. And many of those professionals we would have worked with in the previous 2 years on other projects like clean energy projects and on house upgrades for senior citizens in our area who qualified for free house upgrades. So our first eco tour, we decided to have the eco tour to Inishturk Island, which is an island off our shore with a population of 50 people. And we organised the eco tour to coincide with the launch of the Energy Master Plan on the island, and a lot of our professionals would have been attending that Energy Master Plan. Now, we participated in the Energy Master Plan, but the focus of our eco tour was 2 passive houses that had been built on the island recently, and they're locally owned and they're for holiday lets. So that was the focus of our eco tour. So to jump forward, coming back on the ferry afterwards, we looked at the positives and so on, and we had networked with the core of our knowledge network group. We had shared a lot of knowledge, and we had 7 hours on the island, enjoyable hours, networking with the group. But we knew ourselves that we had not shared any know-how. We hadn't achieved our aim of sharing know-how. So we had to change our plans and we had to think about it. And what we decided to do was, rather than doing post and pre-renovation eco tours, that we would organise our pre-renovation eco tours to have the contractors on site during the tours. And that is the approach that we took. So our second eco tour was to an old schoolhouse in Cregganbawn, where it had been built in the 1890s, but it was derelict since abandoned in 1974 and derelict when it was bought by the current owner. And the current owner he's a conservation stonemason who's very passionate about conservation and restoration. And so he was on site doing the restoration during the eco tour. So when we took our people there, he was able to demonstrate all the measures he was taking on site and show us exactly what he was doing. So we learned a lot about what he was doing. But it's a very sympathetic renovation where he tried to capture all the embodied energy in the building, and no synthetic insulation materials were used. So we found, because of the good feedback we got from that, we decided to organise our next 2 pre-renovation eco tours with the contractors on site. Yeah.
Oh, very nice. So you learned from your first experience and then developed the concept and were successful with that. That is great to hear. I have another question to you. So as well, we discussed in all our meetings, you had a lot of different renovation techniques that you visited, or where you visited the places they were applied. So you just mentioned one. Maybe this was already the one that people were most excited about or were surprised about, that you can renovate houses with only reused material. But I would like to hear from you what you feel your network was most engaged with.
Yes, I suppose I'll move on to the next 2 eco tours. We had the contractor on site, and we saw all aspects of renovation. Like we saw the underfloor insulation going in. We saw a house in Westbrook being wrapped, external wrapping with insulation, and we saw cavities in Louisburgh being pumped with the EcoBead. We saw, as in the video there, we saw cellulose material being pumped into the attic for attic insulation. And the contractors demonstrated each one of these measures and explained them and all the detail on them, and there was great discussions around them. I think a particular interest in the network was the attention to detail needed in renovating old buildings as opposed to a new build. And even simple things like how you link up the underfloor insulation with the wall insulation, and how you link up the wall insulation with the attic insulation to make sure there's no leaks. And also the attention to detail around utility points on external walls, switches, plugs, sockets, where you have to really do a detailed job on sealing those so that you don't have leaks or drafts when the building dries out following renovation. Now, I feel that all of these things that were demonstrated it was very good when we went to the post-renovation eco-tours, because the people understood when the eco-tour host for the post-renovation said, I did this measure, that measure. Our members knew what they were talking about. They knew exactly, but they could also feel the comfort in the house. That was the benefit of these renovations, and they could also listen to the eco-tour host telling us about the reduced energy bills and so on. I suppose another thing that I would say on the know-how is that towards the end we noticed that some of our post-renovation eco-tour hosts gained huge know-how in project managing their own renovations. And this is, I think, a huge asset to our group and in our community. And finally, just to say that, on some of our post-renovation eco-tours, we saw heat pumps, explained and demonstrated. And we saw heat recovery ventilation systems explained and gone through and comprehensively explained. So I think that we did a very good job in the end on the know-how side of renovations.
That's great to hear. Thank you for that brilliant explanation. And I'm sure if people have questions towards you, we can come back in the Q&A session after we hear from our other 3 local partners. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Peter.
So going back to the slides now, I'm coming to our second local partner, and I'm going to introduce the work of Amiestas, or Let's Renovate the City. Next slide, please. Which is a one-stop shop since 2019 in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. But has been active as a public institution since 2007, administrating the Vilnius City Energy Efficiency Program. So they are specialized in multi-apartment building renovation, as over 70% of this building stock in Vilnius was built before 1993. As you can see on the left-hand side, they were very active as well, and their network entails 38 members, which they were able to motivate to visit several eco-home tours, but also engage in dialogues with heating, ventilation, and facade suppliers. Next slide, please. So we are now wanting to thank Amiestas' team for being so enthusiastic and bringing stakeholders together to talk and discuss about the benefits and also the worries regarding renovations who would have otherwise not met so easily. And of course, for welcoming us in Vilnius in the light of our study tour. We can stop the sharing now, and I'm happy to welcome Lina Bugolite, part of Amiestas, and today here to talk about the achievements, but also challenges, being a one-stop shop and forming a knowledge network. Hi, Lina.
Hi, everyone.
Lina.
So my first question to you, Lina, is as a one-stop shop, your organization already has extensive knowledge of bringing together people who offer renovation services and those who seek them. What was, in your perspective, the main difference of your experiences building up a knowledge network, and what did you find challenging?
Well, first of all, being as a one-stop shop for multi-apartment building renovations, our day-to-day operation involved dealing with the residents on a daily basis, basically. And I think the main difference, building up the knowledge network, it was bringing together not only the residents or the homeowners of the multi-apartment buildings, but also the experts. So we kind of had them under one roof. And we think that this experiment was very successful, not only because we had an opportunity to organize these educational events, eco tours, and share the knowledge between the residents and the experts, but also as an organization, as a one-stop shop, we learned a lot. And we found that the information, unfortunately, is still missing. There is a gap, and people still wanting to know more, to learn more. And I think still the main challenge was that by organizing the events, we always kind of double checked or triple checked whether participants will attend, but unfortunately, they kind of gave us the various reasons why they couldn't, such as, let's say, weather conditions, location of the event, timings, and other factors such as like personal reasons and so on. However, we still think that was a very good experiment, not only for the residents but and experts, but only for us as well.
Yeah, very nice to hear. Yeah, we realized that constant engagement is a challenging task, but I think you also managed to get people on board with various activities and really challenging this tactile exploring of techniques and materials throughout your events. So we are very happy that you engage in that way. And my second question would be a bit specific to the situation in Lithuania. Chris already mentioned that in multi-apartment buildings throughout Europe, there's a system of voting for or against the multi-apartment building renovation, and that is a specific difficulty in your case, as I understand. So in what ways do you think now the building up of the network, and especially also doing eco tours, can help getting this information to the people so they can base their decision on that?
Yes, well, speaking about the homeowners of multi-apartment buildings, it's of course it's a challenge to convince them to get them to vote for the renovation projects, because in Lithuania it's the system is that it has to be agreed by the majority of votes. It's 50% plus one vote, and then we can go ahead with the renovation project. But as I mentioned before, there is still a lack of knowledge or the lack of information for the residents about the renovation projects overall. And because people are coming from different backgrounds, different education and lifestyles, so we as an organization, we have to find the ways to kind of provide that different level of information and, as we say, to speak their language, to explain the whole process in detail. But we found that organizing these events, educational events and eco tours, and meeting the suppliers, meeting the experts, it helped us a lot, because people could come and see, from the first point of contact, rather than us explaining the information or providing the information or explaining the situation. And well, actually the participants, our knowledge network, were very grateful for these events, because we received very positive feedback from them. they were very happy to have that opportunity to meet the suppliers, to ask the questions they had. And also the eco tours, they enjoyed that as well, because they could see how actually they could see themselves, how the renovation project could improve and transform people's homes and improve the quality of life as well. And I think the biggest achievement for us, it was that one of the multi-apartment buildings, well, the renovation project was confirmed throughout the whole shared Green Deal experiment. We had a couple, a husband and wife, and actually they initiated the renovation themselves when we started the experiment sometime in June last year. And at our last event, final event in March, we found out that their investment plan was confirmed. So basically, at least we have one project confirmed via shared Green Deal experiment, which we're very grateful.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Lina. Yeah, and I wish you success in trying out different ways of sharing knowledge and know-how around renovation in the future.
Thank you.
And I think, yeah, we have time for questions in the end. I would now like to come to our third local partner, which is ECODES, an NGO based in Zaragoza. Next slide, please. That works towards accelerating the transition towards a carbon neutral, inclusive, responsible, and circular economy. And they do that through bringing together the 3 pillars of change, which are public bodies, the private sector, and civil society. Zaragoza is a city in the northeast of Spain, which is being densely populated by over 600,000 people, and with a building stock that was to 56% built before 1981. Through ECODES' approach to connect political and economic stakeholders with civil society organizations and neighborhood associations, they were able to activate 34 network members. And as you can see on the left-hand side, they visited 13 renovation sites and tried out different engagement techniques. Next slide, please. So today, I'm going to talk to Javier Rubias Gonzalez, who has brilliantly built up Zaragoza's knowledge network and has assured its long-term significance through involving a diverse stakeholder group and creating a respectful environment of learning with and from each other. Now, I would like to talk to Javier about his experiences with social barriers to renovation and how to embed renovation activities in Zaragoza's political context. There you are.
Hello.
Hey. So Javier, my first question would be, ECODES has already had extensive experiences with engaging citizens and especially neighborhood organizations, and knows a lot about the barriers to renovation for certain groups. So what are the specific social barriers in multi-apartment building renovation in Zaragoza that you encountered, and how did you address them in the knowledge network?
Well, thank you very much for the session and having us through the experiment. As Lina already mentioned, multifamily buildings are a whole beast on their own. Like in Zaragoza, we have, or in Spain, 2/3 of the population live in multifamily buildings, which is already quite a barrier regarding renovation, and half of the population living in buildings that have more than 10 households. And we have to make it clear that the community of owners or the community of households are not an affinity group. It's not an energy community or people that already knew each other. They are people that don't know each other, and that in many cases, when they have to gather up, it's not related to joyful reasons. It's basically related to repairing something that has broken down, and normally with arguments and so on. So normally renovating is quite a difficult process in multifamily buildings, and just having one problem amongst one of the households can already create a blockade that can stop the whole renovation process. There are very different reasons why some households cannot be able or can vote against or just be opposed to renovating. Many households cannot even afford the renovation, and just having one household that the rest of the building knows that won't be able to afford can already block the whole process, because they just start wondering, so what are they going to do? What happens if they don't pay? Also, elderly people, maybe they don't want to have debts for their children, which also makes it block the whole process. So just having one household that is in one of these situations can block the whole renovation process for the building, and in some cases for areas of a neighborhood. So what we found out, or what we tried to focus was on solutions, because from our point of view, introducing vulnerable households, introducing these people who normally face these barriers the most, makes, first of all, for us, it was a great exercise of empathy, because it brings to the rest of the neighbors, to those neighbors that sometimes have these preconceived fears of, oh, they're not going to be able to pay, or, oh, they're just lazy people, or this time of a stigma very much related to vulnerable households. You release these people of this, and you bring some solutions, like sometimes community of owners can have a loan as the community, and they can internally organize. So maybe these households don't have to pay as much per month, but pay a bit later. Or maybe sometimes you bring the information of the incentives that are already there for these kinds of households, because sometimes they are not aware of this, of bigger incentives, or maybe money that you can receive before starting the works. And also from a political side of view, just also listening to the barriers that these households face can help greatly to change the policy and change the incentive programs that are currently underway, and can make them more affordable or more accessible for these households, so you can reach easy and accessible house renovations for all.
Great. Yeah, I think your answer made really clear that renovation is a social process, and that it needs a lot of communication work and mediation. So jumping a bit to my next question, based on those experiences that you had now in the social experiments, could you share the insights of integrating those network activities into the bigger picture, into the political context of Zaragoza, or even like regional context?
Yes, well, for us, as I ended up the last answer, the decision makers, the policy work, the renovation programs are a key part of the existing barriers, or a key part of the solution for these existing barriers. So we thought that it was key to have decision makers, public workers in the network, and being part of the activities, which after all was a very hard work. We did carry out some reflections over the process, that normally advocacy work is done basically dancing the music that the decision makers are playing. So you normally respond to the policies they are already working on, and you're responding to the work that they are already doing, and you're trying to influence the things that they are already working. But in this case, we were talking about a quite long process of almost a year, in which we wanted policymakers to come to us and public workers to come to us. So the first barrier we found out was that electoral processes tend to make things take much, much longer. We had both local and regional elections in May, and that basically meant that up until September, we couldn't start with the activities, because some governments changed, some parties changed, and that made everything much more difficult. Then another part of integrating policy work in this sort of network was the timing, the scheduling that we have to work with. I think that most of the people maybe in the audience already know that decision makers at all levels have very busy agendas. So when you're trying to fit like privately owned households, or the household, the owners of homes, the professionals, and then these policymakers to be able to attend the same events, it can be very, very difficult. And then sometimes even when you have everyone confirmed, they end up not appearing. So it is very difficult to bring them here. So what we ended up doing was focus a lot on the technical level of the public workers, because we consider that they are the people that would receive this information from the network the best. They would receive this grassroots movements information, and they would be able to apply it to policy, and then only for the key events invite the high-level decision makers, because having them through the event would be impossible. And then just lastly, another barrier or another difficulty that we faced was that we were already considering mixing citizen language in a way and professional language regarding renovations, but then we also had to overlap the policy language and the political language and try to make it all of them accessible for all the participants at the same time. So it was just like bringing another rock into our backpacks, but we thought that it is necessary, and we still do.
Thank you so much for explaining that. Yeah, a big task which you did navigate. So we are happy if people have questions more towards you in the Q&A session. So thank you, Javier. I would now jump to our fourth local partner, coming to Habitat for Humanity in Hungary. So many of you might know that Habitat for Humanity is a bigger NGO active in over 70 countries. Next slide, please. And here we work with Habitat for Humanity Hungary, which is active since 2016, and is working towards ensuring that everyone can live in a healthy and affordable home. Since its inception, it has massively contributed to the visibility of topics of energy poverty and its connection to renovation in Hungary, and has, for example, supported low-income households in assessing renovation funds. For our social experiment, the Habitat for Humanity Hungary formed the Knowledge Network with 34 members in the rural area of Nógrád County, which is located on the border with Slovakia, and is dominated by energetically substandard houses relying on fossil fuels for heating. So during the events, as you can see on the left-hand side, they visited 7 renovation sites and yeah, had a lot of network meetings going. Next slide, please. So today I have the pleasure to talk to Shoshana Korita, who is representing Habitat for Humanity Hungary, and is eager to involve people who are facing various barriers to renovation, sensitive to their needs and attentive to their knowledge. So thank you, Shusha, for being here today. And I want to talk to you about engaging households and families in rural areas of Hungary, and especially Nógrád County, and who are in vulnerable situations. So, hi, Shusha.
Greetings, everyone.
Perfect. So my first question would be, who are the households that are part of your knowledge network, and what makes them structurally excluded by current political decisions around renovation programs and especially financial support?
Thank you for the excellent introduction, Pia. Nógrád is one of the 19 counties within Hungary. It's dominated by small villages. It's a rural area, as you said, with generally low performance of houses, single-family buildings, and it's typically a low-income area. So we specifically aimed to engage vulnerable and energy poor homeowners in our network, because we wanted to explore the difficulties and the challenges they face when they were considering home energy renovations, and the types of information and support that they would need to make their homes more energy efficient. In Hungary, over the last few years, there have been some housing subsidy programs, but they have not been socially targeted or supported in any way. These programs generally involved or involve post-financing schemes and sometimes loan facilities. that they they have been and they are available for mainly for higher income earners. Because households in energy poverty typically have no savings to cover upfront costs, and they are not eligible for loans because of their financial situation. So in fact, the financial issues are the first barriers that they need to these households they need to overcome before they can even get into the technical questions of home energy renovations. However, even if there is social targeting of and there is availability of financial resources for vulnerable energy poor households, their presence and availability does not always guarantee the access to it, because these households need other types of information and support to be able to access these existing financial support. They definitely need this kind of financial support to even think about energy renovations. So the other types of information and support they would need is that it is a kind of, first of all, it's a kind of assistance with the applications to these available subsidies and the administration. They are not always aware of the labyrinth of the bureaucracy that they need to face. Also checking whether and how they can meet the criteria and the requirements of the subsidy, as well as they also need the technical advice to ensure that renovation will actually deliver the energy savings that that the renovation is done for, and they can switch from outdated heating systems to healthier and more sustainable heating, for instance. And this is exactly what they can gain from this knowledge network. They have, with this joining this network, they have first-hand information from those households on one hand who have already applied to these subsidies and done the renovation, and as well as the professional members who represent, for instance, the institution who provides the grant or the financial support, so they can have hands-on information from them as well as constructors who can plan and execute the renovation itself. So having this network and this network-like structure, and with the discussion events as well as these house visits, the eco-home tours, they know that they meet people and they get contacts whom they can trust. Trust is a very important issue for these households, and so they can be sure that the renovation that will be delivered it will be a quality renovation.
Great, thank you. Great that you could create an environment of trust, and that you can, you brought those people together to have a discussion on eye level. That is great to hear. My last question now to you would be what strategies you applied to get people who face economic precarity to join and engage in the network, having in mind that they often also have time constraints regarding their paid employment and also unpaid care work responsibilities that comes all on top of engaging.
Yes, so on the one hand, we had to be able to organize events at the time that suited them mainly because of their work engagement. We chose weekday afternoons and evenings after work, but actually the workshop discussion that we had at the closing event, it showed that weekends would have worked better for them. They would be typically have been more able to make more time on the weekends. So when we are considering continuing with the knowledge network, we need to keep that in mind. They were also from different villages. Travel was a challenge, so we needed to take care of that and organize that as well. And we also decided first that we wanted to compensate them for their time and efforts. So we first gave them vouchers for their participation and always treated them, you know, food and drink at the event. However, later in the course of the event, they became very motivated to engage by several other things. Firstly, the fact that through the network, they had access to trustworthy information and trustworthy contacts, people, as well as they could get actual practical help regarding their own renovations. Secondly, they found the opportunity very fulfilling to pass on their own experiences to others who are in the same situation as them. So it was very motivating for them. One interesting phenomenon was reported by these residential participants during the final event, is that where a renovation had already began in the meantime, members started to call each other to find out what stage the renovation was at and what they needed to know, what their experiences were. So they gained personal relationships, and they started to talk to each other even outside of network events. So this was quite an interesting outcome. And there was a very interesting third motivation, which was kind of sense of empowerment, that they could feel that they had an important role to play in the work of the network, and they were equal players, for instance, with the professional members, and they could to provide valuable information and knowledge, and also gain information and knowledge, and this was equally important.
Great. Thank you so much for those insights. Everything's very interesting, and there are a lot of similarities also in this point of engagement within all local situations. But I now want to give the floor again to Marcella for the Q&A, as I think we took a bit more time than we were planning, but I think it's okay.
Yes, so thank you very much for those interesting experiences. I think people in our public are also looking forward to hear more on have some question. I think the first one is from Vicky Green about a similar strategy to the Renovation Way strategy in the UK. So please, do you want to comment on the political landscape in the UK?
Thanks very much. Well, there isn't an equivalent for the Renovation Wave strategy in the UK. The Conservative government in the UK has actually sort of pulled out on a lot of these things, and it hasn't helped that we're not in the EU anymore. We did have a gas boiler ban for 2035, so that no more gas boilers could be bought for homes, but that's been removed and replaced with an 80% reduction target, but there aren't really the commitments to achieve that. The main UK government plan at the moment is something called Powering Up Britain, and it's all to do with energy security, so reducing energy demand in buildings and industry by 2030 by maybe 15%, but the emphasis is on energy security sort of as part of the worries with the economy that the government faced following the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. But there is a new government that's likely due come the end of the year, and they are taking it more seriously, and they have an array of plans to do with insulation. That's their main, they're not talking about heat pumps or anything, but insulation. They're planning to do something called a warm homes plan that will I think make quite a difference across the UK. So I guess next year onwards there could be more action.
Thank you, Chris. So our second question is from George Steve, and it's about people that are rejecting renovation or that are protesting against it. George, I don't know if you maybe want to open your mic and explain a bit more for context. Or But yeah, if it is not the case, then so George wants to know if there are tips of resources that could be recommended to help overcome discontent, or simply combines people that are passive or stubborn, again, energy efficiency measures. For that, I want to address this question to Lina, who has already have some experience with people that are not okay with undergoing the renovation process of a multi-apartment.
Yes, I think as I mentioned before, when we were talking to Pia, probably the most important thing to know that there is still lack of information and lack of knowledge from the residents. So they're not aware of what could be done, what is happening. So the constant, like the continuous education, it has to be implemented. And as a one-stop shop, as our organization, from our own experience, we know that sometimes you even have to go and talk to them about the same things for many times. We had a case, we had a project, I think it's the kind of most famous case in Vilnius, probably. We had a building, K13, we call it. And normally for a normal renovation project, we go and see the residents for 3, max 5 times. But in this case, we had to go and see them about 20 times, 20 meetings organized. And that was in a scope of like 2-3 years. So what we found out, what we learned, that it is important to find an active community leader who can also talk to them, talk to the residents. It could be a neighbor, it could be their community leader, some sort of, so they can help us to convince the residents to explain in their own language. As I mentioned, they're coming from different backgrounds, different education, different lifestyles. So you have to find the way how to talk to pretty much every single one who's interested or who's not interested in renovation, and basically to find that connection with them. Also, what else we found that was useful, these educational events and eco tours. When people see themselves, they can change their mind. This is just like a brief response. Thank you.
You're muted.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lina. So we have also a question regarding solar balcony module in Germany. That question, I think, is not going to be answered in this panel. On Agnes Schoenfelder from My Hire already provides some insights on that. My Linda, you can also contact me for further information, but I will go to the next question more related to the network. So it is about engaging people with health conditions. Richard, you mentioned that briefly, and Sarah wants to know more about the barriers of engaging these groups, and also how you overcome those barriers through the network activities.
Hello, sorry. I suppose in a small community, we don't have the issues that would be in Vilnius or Zaragoza, because it's all privately owned houses, and they're all generally detached houses, so we're dealing with one owner. But we have been working for a number of years with people who are entitled to house upgrades through their, senior citizens in our group, and so on. We didn't really get much engagement with social housing, which we would have liked to, but we're hoping to continue to work on that, because we were, through the council, there was lots of issues with GDPR and so on. They couldn't give us access to some of those, but we're hoping that will still happen. But the people that we are dealing with, we have done a lot of renovations in the year. I think 56 houses, and a lot of those are for people who are fuel poor.
Thank you, Richard. And so we have two more questions. So one is from Raquel Rodriguez from EcoSurveys. So I'm going to direct this question to Javier. On is about there were tenants, families, not only owners involved. On what are the recommendations that you could give to work on mediation between owners and tenants, so that also tenants can benefit from renovation?
Yes, in our case, in the network itself, like the core group, there were no tenants, but when we carried out the eco tours, we did it organizing them with the neighborhood associations and announcing them widely in the areas that we carried them out. So we did try to bring some tenants to the eco tours themselves to have their opinion and their experience. We have to say that we didn't have that much success with bringing tenants, because what we have found out, or we are already suspicious of, is that normally tenants are left aside regarding renovation processes. Normally tenants are not invited to owners' meetings of the residential blocks in which these things are discussed. So there are several barriers, and what we have thought, or what we are trying to do from our side in the tours and in our work in general, is going from the owner community to the neighborhood community. So not only trying to have these meetings with all the people that are actually living in the building, so not only the owners, but also the tenants, and also try to carry out the renovation work or the renovation discussion, not so much only as at a building level, but more at a neighborhood level. So we think that that is a way to solve these barriers. And then regarding the second question, regarding the split incentives or the tenant, landlord, owner problems that tend to happen, that normally landlords have to cover for the renovation, but they see no incentive for that. We have had some success stories or some possible work on calculating the amount of energy that is saved through the renovation, and try to increase the rent of the apartment in that amount, not higher than that, because that can lead to gentrification processes, but in a way try to increase the rent as much as the tenant is saving in energy, and try to reach an agreement through that. But from our point of view, it is landlords in general tend to be a great barrier, and it's a very difficult barrier to solve. I think that in multifamily buildings, the best way to do it is just to convince everyone else, honestly.
Yes, thank you very much, Javier. So on the last two questions are similar and are related to the gender dimension in our knowledge network. So what are the dimension on? So we gender was a cross-cutting issue considered through all the experiment, as we recognize that on the first hand renovation is or tend to be perceived as a male-dominated domain, and that also the process of decision making around renovation intra-household is gender. So for that we have a target that was engaging at least 60% women in the network, and that including both like the professional, also the citizen part, and also to have to develop like moderation forms or activities or ways to do the things that make everyone feel comfortable, and that address issues like also the time unavailability of women to participate in certain activities. So yeah, to give also now the floor to the like in general to the recommendation and to the learnings from all this process, and also yeah to talk a bit more about the gender component. I will give the floor now to Ageli from the Aalborg University, who can also complement this information on the gender component. Ageli.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Marcela. Yes, I think mostly covered, Marcela covered generally the intentions that we had for this. However, as each site and each location was different, we've had different ways of understanding issues of gender. And just to give you an idea, for example, is that we actually had, in a lot of cases, we started with a 60% target of reaching women in the network. However, what we saw is that a lot of the participants, especially from the households, were actually mostly women that wanted to kind of be part of the network. So we had to kind of reverse that thinking and think it's not necessarily the participation in the network, but it's how that extends to the decision making at home. It was very hard, and it is still very hard to untangle a lot of things about what is normal in each location. So in most cases, families or households will actually take decisions together. However, there are naturally some interest or some more, let's say, stereotypical areas where we would find women and men engaging with. For example, we saw a lot of the men kind of engaging more, especially on the household participants, not the professionals, but engaging more into the kind of technical parts of the renovation process, whereas women will engage more with the process of how it affects the home and how these changes will be put into their everyday life. And on the side of professionals, now I'm not going to give you a very complete answer for everything, because I'm also going to go into a presentation of different recommendations. But on the professional side, which was the hardest part to, I think, in certain locations, was quite hard to engage women professionals, is actually the fact that the industry of renovation, which is quite fragmented, there's a lot of small businesses there, a lot of, technicians that come in and go, a lot of different bodies. So that was much harder to engage women. And I think we definitely in the beginning also were worried about issues of trust in terms of how what is the difference, how we can understand that people will perceive information, especially on technical aspects, given by different genders and different people that represent the industry. Our results will actually show more the variation of what happened, because at the moment we don't have a complete picture to give you in terms of, and that's the honest answer, in terms of what actually has happened. But what we are doing is we're very consciously monitoring and observing and discussing everything with our local partners in order to understand what are the best ways to engage and be sensitive to gender and intersectionality issues. So, thank you. And actually, I will continue. Yes. Okay, great. So my name is Angeliki. You already know I'm a researcher in Aalborg University in Copenhagen, and I'm part of the renovations group. So I'm going to give you a quick glimpse on some of the recommendations we have been putting together in how to build a knowledge network for efficient renovation. Just a quick thing to say that, of course, I'm only showing you a representation of that, is not absolutely everything, and those recommendations will be published on our website. So before I jump into the actual recommendation, I just wanted to bring your attention back to the idea of the renovation practice. Already Chris talked to you about the know-how of renovation, what that means in different dimensions, but also I wanted to bring in the idea that renovation is not always necessarily a kind of process that has, it's not like the end result, it's not the product of renovation, but it can also refer to an ongoing practice, or what we call social practice, which involves people's everyday life and decision, is very distinct into each area, into each culture, and involves all this know-how that Chris mentioned, all this tacit knowledge, which is knowledge we don't often put into words. It's things of knowing how to do things so that we can create a home, for example, that is suitable for people. So we started with this understanding in order to build also the experiment, so that it's important for us to understand what are these collective understandings in each of the contexts that we're dealing with. How is renovation then practiced? So if we go to the next slide, then it's been, you know, a really big wealth of information, of know-how, of experiences in those sites that we have looked. So it's important for us to actually make sense of what was successful, but also what was not successful, or maybe, you know, we thought it would be, but it didn't work. So as a beginning, let's say our aim was to kind of develop energy efficient renovation know-how through these network focused initiatives, and having at the same time appropriate consideration of matters of inclusivity. So we were quite sensitive into how to be inclusive, how to address the diversity and other issues. So and next, please, Brian. So in order to compose those recommendations, we had, let's say, a 3-stage process. So initially, before we actually spoke to our local partners and before we actually engaged all the participants, we sort of developed a conceptual framework with the research and the practice team in the project. Then we had a workshop as part of one of the meetings that we had all together as a group of the experiment, so together with local partners and research partners. And that was a big brainstorming and a big part of the process of recommendation building. And then the third part was input that we got from the network participants through the different events and through the things that happened. So if we go next. So I will go through this very quickly because I'd rather focus on the actual recommendations. So in the beginning, our sort of, let's say, theoretical approach or our conceptual framework is that we looked at renovation as a stage process, and we took inspiration from previous research that identified this renovation as an ongoing process that has, for example, a thinking stage, a planning stage, performing the renovations, sharing with others, and a continuous dreaming about how you make and remake it. So taking inspiration from that, we sort of thought, what if we, as a kind of, let's say, experiment, see, can we fit within those categories the recommendations, so that we can also provide people with an idea of what stage they would be and what they could do about it. So we had 4 broad categories, which were about the planning or designing of the network, then the recruitment, which is a really big kind of phase, then the performance and facilitation of activities, and then finally the sharing or the kind of networking and how that is actually going outside the network itself. Okay, so we go in the next. And then that's just a little showcase of what happened when we did the workshop together. So researchers and local partners from the local partners you've just met, and we kind of had a brainstorming group. So we split in different groups, and then we switched, and then we produced, taking turns into different categories. Yeah, and then sorry, next one, please. Yeah, and then the input was actually recommendations and suggestions and quotes that the local partners helped us collect, and then put them together with what we had initially identified. If we move next. So what we have at the moment is we have a 4-stage process with some subcategories, let's say, that form. So we have, it is a kind of circular process, but not really, but it's not a, you know, linear process for sure, because it can be interconnected, and definitely there are connections. We kind of tried to show this as a circular thing, but there are interconnections between the categories. So we have broadly the first step, which is designing the network. First is kind of looking into that, and some subcategories that came into there was the idea of understanding the focus of the network and the purpose of the network. So that's the first kind of thing of how to conceptualize it. And then moving into number 2, which is about recruiting people, but also start to design the activities. So in there, we had some subcategories such as how to define expertise. What do we mean by that? And that is, of course, understanding that it's not just the professionals. Then how to reach groups in vulnerable situations, how to target professionals, and how to specifically recruit for events or specific events. And then moving from that to the running of activities. So this is the doing the actual network things. So how to set up activities, how to account for difference. And this is all the diversity and inclusivity stuff. And in particular, how to address the gender and intersectionality, but also practical tips about facilitation and presentation. And finally, we kind of all felt that there is the sharing part. So it's the sharing knowledge and the dissemination. And within there, we had some subcategories of saying how to find your audience, what is the audience for that network, how to use media and mediation, and at the same time, how to help and reinforce storytelling, and for example, how to visualize what could be invisible groups, different citizen groups that they might not be necessarily part of that. And if we move to the next, and then I'm going to look into the specific, let's say, the 4 different areas, just to give you an idea a little bit more, to open up of what things have come up. So in the first stage of designing the network, we had initially the focus of the network. So we need, for example, to understand what are the local needs and challenges. For example, are there any hard to renovate buildings or different, specific issues that you need to know about before you start? And a very good idea was that it's better to involve the potential participants into asking them, do a survey to say, what are you interested in? What are the issues that affect the local side? And of course, to understand who these groups are, who are these community groups or individuals that will be part of the network, and understand how we can focus on their lived experiences. But at the same time, it's quite difficult to kind of focus too much. So we need to leave it as open as possible, with the idea that the network cannot be a static thing, but something that moves and changes through time. So it's important to leave that out and to co-create with the communities in order to define it. And in terms of the purpose, so you understand the focus, but you need to find a common purpose. You need to understand what are the different forms of knowledge or know-how that you could find, and actually what are the challenges that we want to pick. So identify relevant subjects or issues that citizens in that area are interested in. And at the same time, and this has come actually directly from our participants, is to understand the idea that renovation is not just a technical practice, but has several dimensions, which could be environmental, social, cultural, political. So we need to engage and involve people as much as possible in the communities as a first step to understand what the practice involves. And now we move into number 2. So the next one, which was about the recruitment of the design activities. And as I mentioned earlier, it's important to define expertise. So it's not just the professional technical knowledge, but it's also what people have as experiences in their everyday life and in also previous experience with renovation, but also find the local agents or representatives, people that are trusted within these communities and how they can actually reach out to others. Then we also discussed quite a lot within our group the idea of how to reach out in groups that might be under vulnerable situations. And then what we came up with the idea that it's important to reach those groups, and often there are already what we call intermediaries or people in the community, whether through the municipalities or other groups that have got access to this. So it's important to initially build a kind of trust and communication with those people, and at the same time use them to actually understand how we can identify what those issues are and start from there. And then, of course, target professional members, but at the same time, the techniques of recruitment and engaging professionals is not exactly the same as those of the householders or the tenants. And at the same time, we realized through experience that we could also recruit retired professionals, which have more time to invest and interest, although they might not be necessarily up to date with the latest things, but they're still very good agents to actually use within the communities. Another thing that came up was how to focus recruitment for specific events. Incentives help in many cases, and we know that from all our sites. And then we have a very big list, which will be published on our site, about general guidance and tips in terms of how to consider the specificity of location, timings. A lot of people already discussed this from our local partners, when, where to hold events, etc. So next, please. The third aspect of the recommendation, the third stage, let's say, it's about the running or the facilitation of the activities. So we had, again, 4 categories in here, and that's a lot of practical kind of instruction as well as understanding of diversity. So initially it's about the setting up of activities, of what is the activity about, be clear to people, allow people to tell their story. So it's not just organized by the network, let's say, and run by it, but actually involve different sessions and open it to people's experiences. Set expectations so people know what you're going to tackle, and especially for each event. And at the same time, give it in small chunks, divide it into smaller parts. So people don't have to think this is a daunting thing. They cannot go into such a big session and get lost. At the same time, accounting for difference. So understand or consider what groups in the network might be there. And they might be at different stages. We had people that had already completed renovations, whereas others were still thinking about it or were interested. These are completely different ways of engaging them. Some of them might think they offer the knowledge and others might kind of take it. But I think there is a process of learning and giving in both ways. So you need to kind of understand for that. And at the same time, it's issues of how do people get there? Is it all physical? Do you need to have hybrid, let's say, participation? Can you be more inclusive in terms of where you set it and how? Then issues of gender and intersectionality, which is really the crossing between gender and other issues. So, for example, gender and age, or gender and social or cultural background, or education and gender. So generally, it's good to have a person in the network that monitors and follows that, so that there's already an understanding of how this inclusivity will be achieved, and they can flag any problems. As we did, it's important to engage women in the network by asking them specific questions, allowing them to kind of bring that perspective, not just be there. Okay, we recruited them and that's fine, but allow opportunities, make opportunities for them. And at the same time, as I mentioned, seek women professionals to show the diversity and to actually allow them to share experiences and build trust within the community. So, and then facilitation and presentation, yes, of course, it is important to also observe dynamics. It's important to make invisible technology perhaps visible. So how do you explain to people practically what is there and what it means? And so keep a kind of open dialogue and be informal, and at the same time avoid a lot of, terminology or things that might be quite hard for people to understand. Okay, and we go to the fourth.
Angeliki, sorry to interrupt, but we are running out of time. We have only 2 minutes left.
I'm pretty much done. The fourth part is the sharing of the knowledge, and through there will be a lot, because it's about having, a very good suggestion as well was the idea of having a name for the initiative, not just say it's a renovation network, but give it a specific name. And at the same time, find ways to build trust and storytelling, share stories, use different platforms, and be kind of quite open. So I'm going to move into my final, please, Ryan. There were a lot of thematic, let's say, recommendations that came mostly. This is pretty much directly from our participants. And I'm only going to pick a couple, and then you can have the slides to look at more. But the idea that renovation needs to be considered at neighborhood or at district level rather than as a collective practice. So it's a collective practice, not necessarily just of individual households. And that the process of renovation might involve many small and disconnected actors. So it's important to understand how to actually bring this together. So yeah, the final slide contains some quotes from our participants, but it's fine. Sorry, we have run out of time. There's a lot to discuss on this, but I guess we can talk about some of this during our Q&A. So thank you for your attention. And
so thank you, Angeliki, for presenting those recommendations. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions on it. So I just want to finalize this webinar saying thank you to you, to all the consortium partners, also to the local partners, and to all the people who who joined us today to know more about how this sharing of knowledge can support and help us to meet the goals regarding efficient renovation. And I will finalize giving the floor to Valeria to talk about one further activity or common activity within the Share Green Deal project, that is the network resulting from all this involvement with local communities and organizations. Valeria?
Thank you very much, Marcela, for giving me the floor. So hello, everybody. I'm Valeria Fantini. I work in ALDA, the European Association for Local Democracy, and we are one of the partners of the Share Green Deal project. I'm here today because, as Marcela was saying, there is a very big activity, let's say a big initiative that is coming up in the upcoming years. In fact, with Share Green Deal, we want to create a network of organizations and individuals that in order to support, again, Green Deal ambitions, among which also like efficient renovation, which is the topic that we discussed today. The idea for this network is for it to run events and also disseminate tools and resources to better build the capacities of the network members for social innovative practices and for also meeting with the goal of meeting these climate change goals, these ambitious goals. So at the moment, we are a very embryonal phase, but our idea for the people who are going to be part of it is for them to be able, again, to connect with a wide range of the diverse European stakeholders, for them to be able to implement very interesting activities in the territory that can be socially innovative. And also for those who are researchers or more interested in the research part, to get access also to relevant insights from social science and humans research. Why are we sharing this with you? Is because, as I said before, we are at this very embryonal phase, and we are in the process of setting the goals of this network. So we would like to involve you in order to help us in setting this goal for them to be really close to your needs. So we kindly ask you to please answer to the survey. It will not take you more than 10 minutes that you can find following the link at this QR code. So that you can be involved in this brainstorming activity, and then maybe later also, if you want to be part of this network, to continue working on efficient renovations and other Green Deal topics. So thank you very much, and I will pass you back the mic, Marcela. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valeria, and thank you all